Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 6 of my Journey to Unguro card review. This time around, I have 2 new Shaman Legendaries, including what I think might actually be one of the best cards we've ever seen in Hearthstone. That probably sounds like hyperbole, but I kind of think it's true. So I don't want to wait any longer. Let's go ahead and jump in. There's 4 cards to review, and I want to get to them as quickly as I can. Starting off with the first Shaman Legendary. This is its new Legendary Quest spell. It's called Unite the Murlocs. The quest condition, you have to summon 10 Murlocs in order to fulfill this quest. And your reward is the card Mega Fin. You'll see him there on the right side of the screen. That is a 5 mana, 8/8 Murloc with a stupid, crazy battle cry. Fill your hand with random Murlocs. So this one is very, very similar to other quests that we've seen so far. It very clearly encourages running a lot of Murlocs in your deck. And unfortunately, I think it's actually a little bit harder in many ways than some of the quests before because the condition is 10 Murlocs. I think we've seen things like 6 Death Rattle minions on Priest's quest and 6 discards for a Warlock. So this one's got a little bit of a higher requirement. Now, obviously, Murlocs are really cheap and you can run a lot in a deck. The problem with that strategy normally is that you run out of Murlocs too fast. You play 2 or 3 per turn. By the 3rd or 4th turn of the game, you're totally out of cards. But with Unite the Murlocs, and specifically Mega Fin, emptying your hand and going all in on Murlocs every turn is no longer a penalty. It's no longer a problem, because as soon as you play Mega Fin, you're able to both develop a huge body, which is usually a nice thing, and completely fill your hand with new Murlocs. So let's say you summon 10 Murlocs by turn 4. I'm not totally sure that's possible given how many cards you draw, but let's say it's by turn 5 or 6, right? Your hand is empty, but you get Mega Fin, you play him on turn 6 or 7, you got a huge minion, and you've got 10 more Murlocs in your hand. So you just keep reloading and doing it again. I mean, you reload once and do it again once, but that's so that you don't run out of gas, which might actually make a sort of Murloc Zerg deck viable for the first time in like 2 years. Now, clearly there's viable Murlocs right now with the water package, with Finja the Flying Star, and Murloc War Leaders and Bluegill Warriors. That's a Murloc set that works, but it's just basically 5 cards. This would be more of the Swarm style of Murlocs that we really haven't seen much of lately. Now, this also importantly does say summon 10 Murlocs. It doesn't just say play 10 Murlocs. That is a really important distinction because of the card Call in the Finishers, which summons 4 Murlocs at once, so that kind of card could help you meet this condition pretty easily. So could things like Finja when he pulls the minions out. Those are going to count towards the quest because those are summoned even if they're not played. So that does make meeting this condition a little bit easier. So ultimately, this card certainly has potential as long as that deck works. Now, we don't know if that deck works. If that deck doesn't work, this thing is trash, right? There will be no reason to play this in any other kind of environment other than a really heavy-handed Murloc-style deck. Even if you tried to squeeze this into like a mid-range deck or a control deck that included the water package, you'd really only ever get to like 5 Murlocs. So it would be really hard to meet the condition of the quest. Now, Mega Fin actually would be a pretty good control card or even a mid-range card simply because he's really efficient for his cost and refills your hand. So he would work in that environment, but it'd just be too hard to actually meet the quest condition. Despite the fact that there could be new Murlocs, maybe if there are 3 or 4 or 5 new really good Murlocs added, value Murlocs, one of which we'll actually see in this review, that could work. Otherwise, this is strictly a Murloc card for a very specific kind of Murloc deck and otherwise probably junk. But again, could be amazing, could be fantastic. If that works and that's how Shaman wants to play, then this is a pretty cool quest. So let's move on to the next Shaman Legendary, and this one is the one I think could be the best card Hearthstone has ever seen. Or if not the best, certainly a really, really, really good one, and one of the best. This is Kalimos, the Primal Lord. It's an 8 mana minion, and normally that's pretty expensive for kind of defining cards or really powerful cards, but this one's worth it. And it's a 7/7, and 8 mana 7/7, right? New memes. It's an elemental, of course, and it has a battle cry. If you played an elemental last turn, so the standard elemental mechanic that we've explored in past reviews, you get to cast an elemental invocation. Now, if you're like me, you have no idea what that means. Well, essentially, that means you get to cast a free spell of your choosing. Now, this has been confirmed. It's not random. You get to pick which one of these spells you're going to cast, and all of them are crazy good. So, Invocation of Air to start deals 3 damage to all minions. Or all enemy minions, excuse me. That's an important distinction. Otherwise, this would just sort of be an abyssal for Warlock. It's, a big body that does 3 damage to the board. But this is specifically to enemy minions, so it doesn't hurt all the little totems and stuff you have out there as a shaman, or all the little token elementals, whatever it might be. It's just affecting your opponent's board, so it's all upside. So it's like a better abyssal enforcer in many ways, even though it's a little bit more expensive. It's got a bigger body and a better effect, even though it doesn't hit your opponent's face. That's forgivable because it's kind of a flame strike / blizzard in a can attached to a big body, so an ultimate board swing or just board protection kind of card. There's also Invocation of Earth, which fills your board with 1/1 elementals, which basically makes this an 8 mana Onyxia. It's very similar, of course, to 7/7 instead of an 8/8, but a cheaper Onyxia. Now, Onyxia is not a card that has been played a ton, but it has seen some play in things like Dragon Warrior in the past. So, another good option if you're just wanting to reload the board after your opponent's used all their AoEs. That's a giant board for 8 mana, which is really nice. There's also Invocation of Water. Restore 12 health to your hero. So this is a great defensive card in those dire moments. It's sort of a mini Reno Jackson, just to give you a really big boost and keep you alive and still develop a body, so you're not risking anything because you're playing a good card, a good body in the process. So that's really nice. And finally, Invocation of Fire, which deals 6 damage to the enemy hero. So ultimately, this can be a fireball, too, that just kills the opponent. And there's all kinds of times where 6 damage is just enough to push you over lethal. If you've got a little board, 3 attack here, 4 attack there, this can be an extra option for burn in your deck. So when you look at these spells and say, how much would these cost as spells? Invocation of Air is probably a 5 to 6 mana card. Invocation of Earth is probably a 5 to 6 mana card, maybe even a 7 mana card, arguably, if you played it on its own. Invocation of Water, I guess the closest thing we've seen is Greater Healing Potion, so maybe a 4 mana card. And Invocation of Fire is sort of a limited fireball, so probably a 3 to 4 mana card itself. So on average, each of these are at least 4 mana and usually more mana worth of value. So when you start to do the subtractions, at its worst, Kalimos is a 4 mana 7/7 because you're going to get at least 4 mana of value. And then its best, it's so much more. And then the fact that you have control over which one of these spells you choose means that it really doesn't matter what situation you're in. This card is going to do something useful for you. On a completely empty board in a vacuum, you can go for Earth and get a bunch of 1/1 tokens. If you're dying, Invocation of Water it is. If you need to kill them, Invocation of Fire. If you need to clear a board, Invocation of Air works too. So I really like the flexibility of this card. I like the control that this card gives you. I like that it's attached to a really sizable body. The only real downside here, the only risk, of course, is that you had to have played an elemental last turn. If you didn't play an elemental, this card is junk. It's an 8 mana 7/7. It's a bad War Golem. So it's absolutely imperative that you run this in an elemental deck, or at least have consistent enough elemental rollout to make Kalimos a good card. Now, it does not seem like that's going to be a problem based on the elementals we've seen. The new ones are pretty good, and Shaman already has a lot of options available to them for elemental without really sacrificing any card quality. So it seems like Kalimos is just going to fit right in. Frankly, even like non-elemental decks, just maybe standard mid-range Shaman decks or control Shaman decks, might have enough elementals just as a part of the package. You might just run like 5 to 8 elementals or something, just to set up this turn, like Fire Elemental on 7, Kalimos on 8. Those kinds of plays could work in maybe just a generic Shaman deck just because Kalimos is so strong. So, an obvious inclusion in elemental decks, maybe still a really, really, really good Legendary everywhere else just because his effect is so strong. I think if this card works, if the deck works, one of the best cards Hearthstone has seen, just because it's got so much flexibility and control in its play. Even if the deck doesn't work, that's going to make me really sad, but still a really good design on this card, and a lot of fun to be had. Whether or not the deck is actually competitively viable, this is going to be an awesome card to play. So I don't think you can go wrong with Kalimos Primal Lord. So let's move on to the next card. It's one of the new Murlocs, I said, that could fit in more of a mid-rangey or even perhaps a control Warlock environment for Shaman, or anybody else for that matter. This is the Primalfin Lookout. It's a 3-mana 3/2, so not the best stats for its cost, but it has a nice battle cry. If you control another Murloc, discover a Murloc. So a conditional discover effect here, much like many of the other kinds of cards we've seen, but these kinds of cards usually work, and they're usually played, and they're usually good. Another Spite Historian, all those kinds of cards that discover you something. Because again, the aspect of choice, having control over your decisions, rewards good play and smart play, and that's going to be nice. Plus, there's some good Murlocs to discover, particularly Murloc War Leader. You can get charging Murlocs, you can get card draw Murlocs. There's a lot of stuff that you could pull that would meet a need. So I think there's a strong enough basis for specific niche kinds of Murloc cards to reward this sort of play that Primalfin Lookout will be good. But of course, this has to be in a specific kind of Murloc deck. It's maybe not just great in a blind swarm Murloc deck because its stats aren't that great and it doesn't buff other Murlocs and all that fun stuff. But in a Murloc deck that's looking to last a little bit longer, looking to make later game plays, looking to live to turn 10, this card makes sense. So perhaps it will work in Shaman with the new quest. But ultimately, I think we have to look at this Murloc's legs and somebody look at this art and tell me what is going on. Does he have like the tiniest little baby legs? Am I seeing this artwork right? Like, is this crazy? I don't know if you guys could even see my mouse, but are these his legs? What is that? Perhaps I'm looking at the artwork wrong, but this looks like a belt, little loincloth, and he has these two little legs. Now, he obviously like walks on his arms, got really big, strong arms, but what is up with those legs? Maybe we don't want to know the answer, but apparently he's some sort of like primordial Unguro volcano Murloc, and those legs are horrifying, so who knows. But still, I think a reasonably decent card, as long as there's a deck to hold him. There's certainly nothing wrong with this card. So let's move on to, I think, the final card in this particular review. This is the Tol'vir Stoneshaper, a 4-mana 3/5, and it's got a battle cry. If you played an elemental last turn, gain Taunt and Divine Shield. So this is another elemental synergy card, not actually an elemental itself, but plays off of, again, the same standard elemental mechanic of playing something in the previous turn. And again, if that condition is met, this is a really strong card. This is Ascension Shieldmaster with Divine Shield. Great anti-aggro card, can really slow down opponents, because by the time turn 4 hits, they don't usually have a lot of the like one attack little stuff lingering around. If you think about Pirate Warriors by that point, it's usually the 3/4s and the 2/3s and the 4/3s that have a harder time working with Divine Shield. And that's probably true on turn 4 for a lot of cases. But even if it's not, it's still absorbing an extra hit, absorbing an extra minion, and it's all upside on a card like Ascension Shieldmaster, which even though it's a vanilla card and a classic card, in fact, a basic card in the old set, that card still occasionally gets teched into decks just to give you that reliable turn 4 taunt as you move into the mid game to slow down your opponents, force them to drive through it. And if you're in an elemental deck and you need the same kind of card, there's no reason not to run Tol'vir Stoneshaper. And in fact, just a 3/5 minion with taunt for 4 mana, even if you're not looking to use it defensively, that's a really good offensive asset as well. Just because if your opponent can't deal with that Divine Shield right away, if you've got other threats on the board, this is the kind of minion that's really hard to remove, very sticky, can pressure them a lot, can make efficient trades with that Divine Shield. So this could even work in, not a super defensive control environment, but perhaps even aggressive or mid-range style decks could use this proactively as well, just because it's such a good statted card and the Divine Shield is strong. But again, has to be elemental, so we'll have to see if elemental decks work. That's always the condition. So really in this review, we've got 4 strong cards. I think 4 great cards. I think Primalfin Lookout perhaps tends towards being average more than great, but still a reasonably good card, but only if each of their conditions is met and each of their decks that they would fit into are actually competitively viable. So in other words, you have to have a Murloc deck to make Unite the Murlocs work. You got to have a strong Elemental deck to make Kalimos work. You got to have a good Murloc deck that fits the needs of Primalfin Lookout to make this card work, and you got to have some Elementals to make Tol'vir Stoneshaper work too. So it's hard to say for sure that these cards are going to be played, they're going to be viable. But again, as long as the meta suits them, I like all 4 of these cards. I think they're solid additions, and I like the design of them too. I think Blizzard actually is showing off some good stuff so far with Journey to Ungrow. So that said, that's going to wrap it up for me and part 6 here of my Journey to Ungrow card review. If you guys have thoughts, comments, questions on these cards, leave them in the comments below. Of course, I'll be happy to read them. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.